I'm going to have another go at making sourdough. As you can see, it's been in my fridge now for nearly 3 years. And I'm going to see if I can make some bread out of it. This is what it looks inside. I followed instructions on YouTube by a German lady and said that you can keep sourdough for a long time in the fridge without actually feeding it if you prepare it this way. And I've prepared it the way she said, putting a whole lot of flour on the top to feed it. And I've used wholemeal flour. So this is my journey. And as you can see, I've got another 2 bottles there, but I think I'll use this one. And it smells yeasty, so that's good. And at the bottom you can see it has actually been fermenting, and then the flour on the top is what it's been using. So I've broken it all up, scraped off the bottom and tried to mix it in. And now I'm going to put it into a clean jar with a bit of water. Take some out of here, put it in there and put it in a warm spot. And if it's true, this should start to ferment in, I don't know, maybe a day or 2. Anyway, I'll keep you posted. Put a couple of solid lumps in there, and now I'm going to add some warm water. I've added my warm water and I'm just going to break it up now. Break up those lumps and make it into a smooth paste. Right, I've mixed it up, added some extra wholemeal flour and some boiled warm water, covered it with a cloth that I found, and we'll wait and see how long it takes before it starts to ferment. And as you can see, there's no bubbles in there yet, but I'm sure it won't take long. Anyway, we'll keep you posted. Well, resurrecting my sourdough culture that's been in the fridge for 2 years, and I made it 3 years ago. And I've had it in the air dryer, and I've given them some water, taken it out of the fridge, put some water in it, and it's been in the air dryer for about an hour, and there is some movement. There's a few bubbles on the top, and I'll just keep it in there for a while longer until I can see there's real movement. And this one here, I took some out of this jar and put it into here and fed it and seeing if there's any movement, and also added some culture to it, some yogurt. So it's my little experiment, resurrecting sourdough culture that's been in the fridge for 2 years, that hasn't been touched. So we'll see how we go. Now I can't wait until the morning, so 3/4 an hour later, and I've got a few bubbles in my sourdough. I did pop it in the oven to heat it up because it's still a bit cool, and I think I see a few air bubbles down there. So I'll check it in the morning. So that's a good sign. So hopefully in another 12 hours I should have lots of bubbles. 12 hours later, and there's been no movement. So I'm going to leave it today to see what happens. So that's a bit disappointing, but never mind, we'll keep carrying on. Checking it 1 hour later, it looks like there's a little bit of movement above the band, and also I see some bubbles appearing. You see those small bubbles? So that's just an hour later. I've had it in the oven because today's temperature is not very warm. So I've turned the oven on and then turned it off. So I'll pop it back in there, but it seems to be going okay. Right, 2 days later, and I can see we've had a little bit of movement in all of them. There's a bit of hooch on this one. You see that watery liquid at the side. More hooch on this one. See that watery liquid, and this has got bubbles and a bit of hooch on it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to discard half of it, feed it, and wait for another 24 hours. Okay, I've discarded some out of each bottle except for this one, and each of them I've given about 2 tablespoons of wholemeal flour and some bulgur wheat, which I think will help with activating it a bit faster. So I'll give them a mix now and then pop them in the air dryer at roughly a warm temperature, 75 degrees Fahrenheit to 100, and we'll see how we go. I'd all mixed up and extra taken out, and I'm going to use that in some bread I'll make today, and it'll give it a lovely flavour. And so all mixed up, and hopefully it will get a bit more movement. I think it was just very hungry, so here we go. 8 hours later, and I'm checking on them again, giving them a bit of a stir, and I'm going to feed them with some buckwheat flour. There was a bit of movement in there, some bubbles, but I just think it's very hungry, so about to give it a stir and pop it back into the air dryer to keep it warm, and I'll check on it tomorrow morning. 12 hours later, or a bit over 12 hours, not a lot of movement in my sourdough, a few bubbles, probably the end one. So I've just saw another video, and it said that if you take 20 grams of your starter and then feed it with 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water and start again, you can revive it. So I'm going to give that a go. So I've got everything ready. So I've got my, well, it's almost 50 grams, 24 grams, let's say 25 grams of starter, and then use 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. So that's what I'm going to do, and I've used the last one, the small jar. 50 grams of flour added, 50 grams of water, well, pretty close to it. Now it's a bit thick, so I'm going to add some more water. More water added, and that's a better consistency. So I'll put that in, let it stand overnight, and we'll give you the outcome in the morning. But the idea is that you have less starter and more food, and I think that's what my problem's been. So we'll give you an update in the morning. Right, 5th one added, and we'll see how it goes. Trying to resurrect my 3-year-old sourdough starter, and we'll see if this new method works. It's been in the fridge 2 years not being used, and I'll see if this method works. 24 hours later, and lots of bubbles in that trial. So I think the instructions quite correct. I was using too much starter, so I'm going to divide these ones now and put them into something smaller. Okay, I have divided up my sourdough starter and I've labelled them 1, 2, 3 and 4. This one I'm going to leave it another 24 hours because it does seem to have some movement, as in lots of bubbles, and it seems to be the better way to do it. And I've taken out 25 grams of each of these bottles and placed them in these, added 50 grams of flour in each and 70 grams of water, only because it was a bit too thick. And normally it's 50-50, but I've done 50-70, if you know what I mean. And I did the same for that yesterday. So I'll leave them for 48 hours and see how they compete with this one over here. And I'm going to place these back in the fridge and use them when I make a loaf of bread, because they've got very good flavour and they smell delicious. So I'll pop them back in the fridge. Wow, 17 hours later, and look at the movement in these jars. Looks like they're finally taking off. This one is just starting to rise. This one is a bit slower. No real movement in that one. But certainly in number 2 and number 1 is doubled. So this is the one with the yogurt in it. So I think you could say I've revitalised my 2-year-old yeast or a sourdough starter. So after 5 days, my 2-year-old sourdough starter has been sitting in my fridge 2 years unused, has restarted using a bit of yogurt. And this one, these 3 here didn't have yogurt, but I'm sure as I persevere, they'll be able to restart as well. So that's amazing. I'm going to bake bread with this one because I think it's ready. Okay, I'm going to start separating number 1, and I'll continue to feed it, and I'm going to cheat a bit and put my sourdough into here to knead it. And so the process starts to make a loaf of bread. Okay, I've weighed out my next lot of sourdough starter, but my recipe calls for 125 grams, but as you can see I've got 112, so I'll go with that and see how it functions, but I think it should be okay. And that's my new sourdough starter, which I'll put back into jar number 1 and feed it again. Okay, it's in my bread tin. Now take it over to the bread maker, pop it in here, and I've already selected the dough setting, number 8 for mine, and we'll start it up. It takes an hour and 30. bread maker into my Dutch oven. As you can see, it's a very wet mixture. So I've just scooped it straight into there, and I'm going to let it rise until double. Day 6, and look at the movement in these. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Amazing. And my bread that I made yesterday using my sourdough starter is in here, and it has risen a bit. You can tell by over there, the line, it was half that height before, so that all seems to be going along quite well. But I'm going to leave it for another day before I bake it. So, success after 5 days, and I'm sure I could have made it a lot earlier. The test continues. I fed it this morning on day 6, and only less than 12 hours later, I've fed it with 50 grams of wholemeal flour and 50 grams of water. I made the mixture a little bit thicker this time in each of them. They're all the same. 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. And I've done that because I've heard that it makes a stronger starter. And I've got 422 grams of leftover, which is active, and I'm going to make a loaf of bread out of that today. Checking my bread. Looks like it's doubled in size. You can see the rim over there. It's up to the edge of the paper, which it wasn't before. I think it's ready for the oven. In the oven she goes on 400 degrees, and I'll bring it out in about half an hour. I'll turn the temperature down in 30 minutes to 350. And meantime, look at my sourdough starter, which I refreshed this morning. I can't get over the movement in number 1. It's just incredible. So that's very, very healthy. It didn't rise a lot, but I'm sure it will taste delicious. Just wait for it to cool. Well, bread is cut. It's got a good texture. It does taste sour, which is good. Next time, I think I'll use a different recipe, because I think the dough, when I started off, was a bit wet. But it tastes delicious.